Hi, everyone. I'm Eugene Sepulveda, the co-founder and CEO of the Entrepreneurs Foundation. We are going to give just a couple of minutes for others to sign on. We know there's new technology, and so in the interim, I'm just going to play music for, let's say, 2 minutes, and then we'll get started. I could dance, but I don't think I should. But you know, we're talking about mindfulness and relaxation. So taking a few minutes off is probably okay. Listening to Buddha Bar might be good too. We'll get started in 2 minutes. Right back with you. One more minute and we'll get going. We're just giving another minute to wait on people that are signing on. Looks like we've got about halfway there, so there's still a lot of folks that will be joining us. We'll get started in just a minute. All right, why don't we get started? And I know people will be joining us during the Eugene Sepulveda. I'm the co-founder and the CEO of the Entrepreneurs Foundation and Culturati. Though most of you on here are members of the Culturati family, there's some who aren't, so I just want to take a moment to tell you who we are. Now, Culturati is a community of leaders who get the power of culture. We get the power that it contributes to our successes, not only productivity and profitability, but our impact on all stakeholders, team members, suppliers, shareholders, and our communities. We host an annual summit in Austin, and we're in the planning stages now. As you can imagine, this will be a different type of summit in the middle of the pandemic. But we're in the planning stages now for our 2021 summit, which we expect to hold at the end of the first quarter of 2021. I want to say thank you to our sponsors, especially Adoro and Silicon Labs, and to our dear friends that we feel like a member of the family of Capital Factory, who we participate with in a lot of what we do, and who has loaned us their platform today that you're seeing us through. So welcome to Culturati Live. This is the third in our segment. We have 6 planned for this year. This session is energy management for executives. We'll be talking about running on empty, how fatigue, burnout, and suppressing our emotions can erode our capacity to lead with empathy. We'll talk about care for ourselves and our teams. And I doubt there's anyone in here today who hasn't experienced this when there's no lines between where we're working, where we're playing, even where we're sleeping at times. Our panelists include Professor Jeremy Hunter, an executive Mind Leadership Institute. Jeremy is a founding director of that institute. Professor Hunter is also an affiliate faculty member for the Weatherhead Executive Education Program, and he serves as an associate professor of practice at the Peter Drucker Graduate School of Management. Jeremy's become a dear friend and really a valued member of the Culturati leadership. We also have Dr. Chela White-Ramsey, who's with Indeed. Chela is a senior manager of Employee Insights Training and Development. She spends her days leading a team of facilitators and designers to problem solve their user-centered training design. She manages a global training program developing leaders and high potential performers. And in our green room conversation yesterday, I was really impressed that she's been leading a group of peers, other female leaders, I think mostly other Black female leaders, through this very, very challenging time. And then there's Brian Kreischer, who's with Frank Rimmerman and Company in San Francisco. Frank is a managing partner, or Brian is a managing partner. Brian has been serving clients on the staff for over 28 years. I'm struck by his enlightened perspective on organizational leadership, how the deliverables, messages, and values are the same for clients, shareholders, and team members. Too often we tend to put these in buckets instead of realizing they're all one. And I especially love that Brian's 5-year-old will climb up into his lap in the middle of Zoom calls. Listen, during yesterday's green room conversation, it became apparent to me that you want to hear more from these three, uninterrupted by me. So thank you, Professor Hunter, for agreeing to facilitate a three-way conversation. And we'll turn it over to you.
My pleasure. Thanks, Eugene. And thanks to the whole team for putting this together. And thanks to Chela and Brian for coming on board. So the reason why we thought to have a conversation about this topic is that I think we've all been kind of gathering a similar sort of data point, that the March, April, May was a lot of sprints to keep the wheels on the machine. And the adrenaline is starting to run out. And if you attended the first webinar I did earlier this spring, we talked about this exact topic. And so now we're on the other side of the adrenaline curve, and what's happening is that our energy is starting to run out. And we thought it would be interesting to have a conversation about kind of taking the temperature around the country about what everyone else is seeing. Brian's comment about all the lanes have kind of been mushed together into one big morass. I did a program this morning for a client, and somebody said, it's not so much work from home, but rather live at work, and which I thought was an incredibly insightful comment, right? And so how do we start to manage all that? So before I ask the other two about their perspectives, what we'd like to do is put a survey, actually a word cloud, into the chat. So Maria, if you could do the honors and click on that link. And the question I want to ask you is, cast your mind back to January 2020 and think about what was your state of mind in that moment. And let me see, I'll put my up here as well so we can share it. What was your state of mind at that moment? And let's take a look. Okay, energetic, great. You're allowed to put in more than one word too. So, what do you got? Hopeful? Excited? Yeah, eager. That's great. Motivated. Yeah, new decade. Excited, optimistic, motivated, hopeful. All right, I'll wait 5 more seconds, see if someone else puts something in there. 20, yeah, okay. Beautiful. Travel, right? Oh, there's a couple more. All right, now, different question. How do you describe your state of mind now? Still hopeful. That's good. It's nice to see that as the first word. Fatigued. Tired, frantic, drained, cloudy, drained. Drained gets bigger. Tired and drained are drained and tired and neck. Empowered, great. Running on fumes. Anxious, point break, frazzled, weary. It's interesting how quickly those words came up compared to the others. So we're tired, right? So as we're looking at this, Chela, how does this resonate with what you've been seeing?
This is pretty on point, Jeremy. Yes, I want to share with you all one of the things that I have been doing, and Eugene alluded to it earlier. I have been trying to understand how Black women are experiencing this moment and how they are recovering and moving through it. And this is very consistent with what I have been seeing. I did a large data collection effort where I collected data from over 200 Black women to understand their experience with both burnout and imposter syndrome. And I just really wanted to know how it was manifesting for people and how they were moving past it. And what I found is that the women that I looked at, they're high achieving professionals. They're many of them, well educated. Some of them are parents, and they are in the throes of a burnout crisis. It's outrageous, really. They are really facing, there's some economic hardships that people are facing. Apart from the COVID pandemic that's also happening, there's racial strife and tension in our country. And it's kind of like we're just experiencing all of this unprecedented stuff all at one time. And this is, across the board. We're all experiencing this, right? But I was specifically interested in the experiences of Black women for my own personal interest. And it's just, this is it. This word cloud is pretty consistent.
Great, thank you. And we'll talk more about your study in a minute because it was super interesting. And Brian, how about you?
We did a similar exercise, Jeremy, and Jeremy's familiar with our firm is about 500 people, just to give you a little sense of scale. And once a year, we bring everyone together. Of course, this year that was in Zoom, but that was the end of June. And what's interesting is first I did a similar exercise where I asked them how did they feel about the organization, the future of the organization, and that was very optimistic and hopeful. And we're fortunate that we have, our clients are doing well, we're doing well, so the economic impact has not hit us that way. But then I asked them about their state of mind. And I'm glancing at it over on my other screen here, and it's similar, but it's, depressed, anxious, tired, weary. There's some grateful and hopeful in there. But what struck me after that meeting is to reflect on the fact that it's very clear the predominant state of mind was negative. Okay, and how different that is from the norm, and how we're all used to experiencing that at times, or feeling burned out, feeling weary, feeling a little pessimistic. And we're used to knowing even where to go in our circles, in our organizations to kind of pump us back up or feel better about things. And to recognize that now the predominant feeling is that negative. It's not so clear where to go, I think. So that's part of what struck me in hearing from the whole firm.
Yeah, a conversation I had this morning with a group of leaders who are all problem solvers. Somebody had the realization that, we're so used to solving problems, but what about the problems we have no ability to solve, right? And so this person said, I feel gripped by these things and I can't do anything. And I think when we talk about exhaustion, we have to talk about like, what are our immediate reactions to the experiences we're having? And one of the things we'll talk about in a minute is like, what are your own relationship to your own emotions, right? And so one of my axioms is that, emotions are not problems to be solved, right? That feelings are there to be felt, right? Emotions are information, and they're telling you about how you feel about something. And so when we're a bunch of doers, we're trying to make the emotion go away through thinking about it. And of course it doesn't work. And so I'm curious to know like what you're seeing in your communities about how people are reacting to it, and what are some ways, let's steer around eventually to what are some ways that people can do something differently and more helpful.
Yeah. One of the things that Brian just said, and I'm probably mixing it up, but this idea of not really knowing where to turn or where to go in the middle of something like this. And I thought it was interesting because I recently met, I told you all that I'm doing this group coaching session with women, Black women, who are experiencing burnout, who are experiencing some of these things, perfectionism, moving through that. And we had a session yesterday. And one of the participants, I'm sure she wouldn't mind me sharing, she mentioned that, sometimes it's really hard because she feels like everybody is going through all of this. And so she feels almost bad or guilty for reaching out to anybody to share, how she's feeling or what she's going through, because she feels like we're all experiencing it. We're all in the same boat, so to speak. But I think it's important to consider that while we might kind of all be in the same boat, we're not all experiencing everything the same way. And also considering the fact that, when we think about the people who we love and those people around us, it's not likely that we would turn them away if they needed to rely on us for emotional support. So considering that, considering the fact that people aren't going to turn you away, the people who love you, the people who are there for you, feel safer to reach out to them, because just like you wouldn't turn them away, it's not likely that they would do the same to you.
A conversation I had yesterday morning with somebody who is kind of the pillar of her family, right, and is the one who's the primary caretaker for this extended clan, and she said, I just can't. I've never asked anybody for help.
Yeah.
And now we have to I think it echoes exactly what you said. It's like, well, I think maybe if big sister decided maybe she needed some help, they're not going to shut the door, right?
They're not going to shut the door, right? And then there's like the cultural expectation too, because if you are, supporting the family, and maybe you're the only one who's doing this, which, if I'm the only one who is a leader at a corporation, if I'm the only one in my family who graduated from college, or I'm the only one who is, in a certain socioeconomic status or branch, I feel this other pressure, this cultural expectation too. And it also impacts my likelihood of asking for help or reaching out for support. And I think that, all of those things mixed together, it's just stirring. We're just swimming in a sea
not so helpful, right?
Of negative sentiment.
Yeah. Brian, how about you?
Yeah, I guess a couple of reflections on that. I've noticed, I guess one of the silver linings to come out of this is that there are more people reaching out and connecting in different ways out of some recognition of that need. One, I'll say at a leadership position, I'm sure everyone's experienced the fact that you are expected, and we maybe put that expectations on ourselves, but we think we're expected to be the steady hand at the tiller and be unflappable, not show a lot of stress. And I'll say at a personal level, there are days where you work hard to exemplify that, and then come home and think, man, I want to, I need to let a little of this out, and find out, no, actually, my kids and my wife had a really stressful, miserable day, and they can't wait to talk about how stressful their day was. And I think, okay, I guess I'll keep doing that. I'm here for you. I'm fine. Don't worry about me. At a practical level, I'll say there's a group of folks in the same position I am, managing partner CEOs of similar firms around the country, and we know each other for years. We see each other a couple times a year at conferences, and we started meeting weekly. And it's really great because what's evolved, we started because we thought, well, we're all dealing with this pandemic, we're all dealing with racial equity conversations in our organizations, but it's become a safe place for leaders and to come and occasionally to get vulnerable in a way we never did. Even when we saw each other at a board meeting or in a conference, we still didn't open up in the same way. That's actually quite hopeful and inspiring to me to realize all these folks who I've always respected professionally. I see a personal side, and I see their caring and asking the same questions about how to support their people. And one, I thought we were a little more special than we are, but that's the good news. Is there's a lot of great organizations who are wrestling with a new priority in some ways.
Yeah, yeah. Now I have several different questions, but one, even before all this, one thing I've observed over the course of my career is that every sustainably successful executive I know, meaning they have a life that you would want, right? Not just a bank account you want or a car you'd want, but the whole of their life is something that's admirable. That every one of those people had created intentionally some kind of support structure for themselves that was outside the family for the very reasons you talked about. And that's under normal times, right? And so when the doo-doo hits the fan, that kind of support structure becomes even more important, right? The other thing is, I'm kind of curious to know, like, what do you see, both of you, what do you see as the commonalities between organizations that have done this well?
I'm going to start with a couple things come to mind. One is, in times of crisis, I think an organization, it needs to have a well of trust. And I always talk about a well of trust because in my mind, that's a visualization that helps. The reason it helps me is because I think it's something that you can't just deplete forever. You have to make sure you're replenishing it at times. And so if you don't have that and you get to a crisis, I don't know what that looks like, to be honest. I've been fortunate not to live through that organizationally. But that's, there's so much fear and these uncertainties stoke those fears. And when fear is running rampant in the organization and there's not trust, I think it wreaks havoc. And so to amp that up, as a practical matter, like we have to over communicate. I've told a lot of people, I feel like my job has actually changed from CEO to chief communications officer. And so much more of my time is on communicating broadly around the whole firm. And I worry, I think we're doing great at it. And I worry, are we replenishing that trust? I think we are doing some things that are doing it, but that's my worry, is if we can't just keep drawing on it.
And when you communicate, what are the, like, in a real detailed way, what are the things you're communicating?
Well, the most effective thing we're doing, and I realize this is no secret sauce, lots of organizations do this, but we've changed the pacing. I used to do town hall type meetings once a month, and now I do it every Friday afternoon. We kind of end the week with that. And I take all questions. So that pace has allowed me, there's a whole bunch of questions about how's the firm doing? What are the economics? What should I expect about, are there going to be layoffs? Are there going to be any raises this year? Are we doing promotions? And I get all kinds of crazy questions in those, and works for me to get them a day ahead so I can not roll my eyes at some of them when I read them off for the first time. But I think that doing that week by week, and the practice that I've never not taken a question. Like I'm going to address that question, and I'm going to try to understand the question under the question, actually has built up a lot of trust, because sometimes it means telling them what they don't want to hear, actually. And then I get the question again, wait, you said last week, are you sure? I'm sorry, but yeah, that's where it's headed. And I do think that builds trust.
Yeah. Even if the news is difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah. Chela, thank you.
Yes. Yeah, I want to be clear in this first disclaimer, which is that I'm not here as a representative of Indeed. I work there, but I want to make that line kind of clear because I don't want to get into any PR trouble. That being said, I'm sure that the leaders at my company would agree with Brian's sentiment about this idea of a well of trust, and that having been established prior to all of everything that's happening in the world. That trust that we have in our leaders, it started well before. I mean, from the moment I joined the organization, I could sit down and have a conversation with my CEO. I've had lunch with him. I've had conversations with him, and feel safe to share lots of things and not feel threatened and have a psychological safety that's there. And I just think that that's so important, is creating that safety and reinforcing that. And so for that to trickle down, that means that managers, individual contributors need to also create psychological safety and practice empathy with one another. And all that does is foster or really strengthen Brian's vivid example of the well of trust, contributing to that. So, so I think that that's so important. I'm sorry, I was distracted for 1 second, but I do think that that's really important.
That's great. We can send some 4-year-olds over if you want to.
Well, I
regret to inform you mine won't show up today, but
I have my dog. She's here, and so every now and then she lets out like a squeal or a yelp. So I'm glad you guys haven't heard.
Hey, Jeremy, can I add on to your question? You say what things maybe help an organization weather it better than another.
Yeah.
And you and I have talked a little bit about a lot of work that our firm did around its values. And I'll be honest, when I knew that was an important process that we underwent a few years back to, kind of re-explore them and re-articulate our values. It felt important to me then, but honestly, I had no idea. And if I could go back and visit that, actually, I wouldn't do anything different. I learned so much from the process, but I would have just told my 5 years ago self, like, believe me, this is absolutely going to be worth every minute you're putting into it. Because in those, it's where you see it in action. And to actually have leaders in the organization sort of pull that up and say, you know what, these are some tough decisions we have to make, and actually turn to the document that is our core values and read it again and say, man, remember what we said here. This is exactly the moment we said it for. Like, it resonates so perfectly. And there are things in there that I was shocked at how they really sound like we wrote them for today. And so anyway, that practice, and I realize we don't have time to talk about all that. Core values can be a really shallow thing, but I think the process of examining the values and looking at them in practice set us up well.
Yeah, and a framework for thinking through a lot of complex stuff. And I think there are 4, right? You started out with a lot, and then they boiled down to 4, and one of them is creating nurturing relationships, right?
That's right. That's right.
Please.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I was going to ask a question to Brian. Curious about values. Actually, I have 2 questions, but my first is around getting buy-in and ensuring that people are on board and actually practicing those values. I'd be curious to understand, what was that process like at your company?
I'll try to give you the thumbnail. I will tell you that who I decided as I looked around at a lot of values. 2 things I'd say. There's a great article by Patrick Lencioni that was very instructive to me about core values. Helped me understand what things really are core values and which are not, but are often mistaken for them. Just go look it up. And then Zappos was the best example I found of core values. And what I loved about it, it wasn't 4 words. It was a document about how you live it. It was kind of like an instruction manual for employees. So I really modeled after that. And we particularly, like our core values are posed as verbs. They're actions. They're not static states of being. And so the document a lot went into, describing it more than just putting a word up there. And we include questions to ask. It says, to test yourself. Am I living this value? Here are some things. Do you make yourself vulnerable in front of your team? Do you ask questions because you really are curious about their answer, or because you want to lead them to your answer? Those types of things. But even that's barely the start. Then you have to think about, how do we, everybody who comes into the firm goes through an orientation process where I talk to them about our core values and how we arrived at them. We bake them into our recruiting stuff, and I talk about them every chance I get, essentially.
Yeah. Thank you.
Did you say you had 2 questions, or did you ask?
Well, I had a second one, which is completely unrelated to values, more related to exhaustion and energy management, and it has to do with expectations. As a leader at a company, and this is for all of us, there are people who, or all of us really, is there space to manage our expectations so that we are giving people space to do less. I mean, I don't even know how else to say it, but like in terms of productivity, you know, has that expectation changed, or do we still expect people to be working at 110%, or, you know, what does that look like from the leadership perspective? Because I know how it looks from my perspective, and that is that I'm giving people grace, but I'm curious about, you know, senior leader.
Well, I think it's a really good question because it's a really hard question. From my perspective, leading a professional service firm, there are expectations from our clients.
Yes.
And I feel a really powerfully strong responsibility to fulfill those. And so at the same time, I feel a really strong responsibility to our people. And I know many people are going through, you know, can't handle the same load right now. But at a macro level, the organization kind of either has to say, we're going to let clients down or cull clients, or we have to find a way to do it. Now, at a very practical level, I think the saving grace is that everybody just picked up 2 hours a day of commute time. And honestly, I think that's what made it work. So there are a lot of people who actually have been able to take on, even if it's another hour a day, they net feel, you know, that it's not eating into things. And the watchword is flexibility, to try to keep messaging that we're going to be flexible. We're going to support each other. We're going to have each other's backs. And there are going to be some team members who can't do the same things, certainly can't do them in the same time frame. And you got to communicate around it. But that's tricky, I'll be honest, because underneath it, you're really saying, hey, I'm going to need some of you to pick up more slack because some of us can't. And if you don't have a good culture around teamwork, I suspect that's a, and it may wear out its welcome after a while. You know, a lot of people probably say, absolutely, right there with you, Brian. But now we're 18 months into it. Really?
Right. Yeah, for now, balancing act for sure.
Yeah, interesting. Well, a couple things. One, you know, we haven't really talked about what happens when your organization isn't going smoothly, right? And people have had to lay folks off. Maybe their businesses are closing, and how do you manage that? And Sheila, we talked a little bit about this yesterday. I thought it might be interesting for you to weigh in, and then I'll talk about that from an internal point of view.
So when we talked about it yesterday, one of the things I said was, I don't know, but I do know about the importance of humanity and being a human and recognizing that the people who are affected are also humans. And I think that needs to transpire across the board. Often as a leader, leaders often get dehumanized in a way. They stop being a person, and it starts to be, oh yeah, Brian, he's, you know, almost like a robot, even though people know that you're a person. And so I think that there's something to be said for exercising humanity and being vulnerable and transparent when making those tough decisions, or at least when communicating them out, because that seems to be where people kind of miss the boat. Like, you have to make tough choices, but I think it's the way that you communicate it out and the environment that you set up. That's what's most important. And if you've done that work on the back end where you've built that well of trust, then your people are it's still going to be horrible, right? Losing your job, having to let people go, it's still bad. But at the same time, if you practice some humanity, it doesn't have to be ugly. And I think that's what's most important. And when I say humanity, to be clear, I'm talking about being empathetic and, you know, attempting to understand what people are going through and making space for people's perspective.
Yeah, you referenced a company that fired 200 people via an anonymous.
400. They 400, 400 people via a Zoom webinar, and a 2-minute Zoom webinar where it was a voice kind of speaking from the ether, just informing people that they've been affected by this layoff. And that's kind of what not to do, right? We want to make sure that's that's clear. That's what we want to be, human, and there's a human way to go about that.
Yeah, and thinking about that, I mean, which is kind of horrifying if be on the receiving end of that. and then what was the state of mind that influenced the decision to be made? Okay, we're going to let go of 400 people in this way. And that's where I think it's pretty clear that a leader's comfort with his or her own emotion is really at the base of that, right? And so we have this difficult thing to do. What it seems like they set it up in the most painless way for the leader, but the most painful way on everybody else's side. And that goes to, what I think of my work as all the skills no one ever taught you in school that are essential for having an impactful life. And one of them is like, how do you manage all the stuff that goes on inside? And if your default setting is to like stuff and pretend the emotions aren't there, that is going to set you up for a lot of pain, because then your decisions are all going to be about how do I avoid emotional reactions as opposed to how do I learn how to deal with the emotions, right? And as I said earlier, emotions aren't problems to be solved. Feelings are information that need to be felt. And the emotional skill with which we bring to these decisions really influences, the quality of compassion and care that can be displayed. And so yesterday I was working with somebody who's just, her whole way of operating in the world was to stuff her emotions, and it didn't serve her well. It didn't serve her physically. It didn't serve her well emotionally. And we just walked through some exercises. And at the end of those exercises, she looked 30 years younger. It was astonishing. And she realized, I didn't have to do it this way. And it's a lot easier if I don't do it this way, The other thing I think is, and I'd love for you to also weigh on this, one of my axioms is that attention needs somewhere good to go. And that, human beings will default to what's wrong, what's broken, what's scary, what's threatening automatically. And that we need to train ourselves really to look at, okay, what can we do? What is possible? What is good going on here? I have to say, as a family, this is kind of our basic MO. And I'm really proud of my family, actually. They've just been spectacular in dealing with all this. But especially as a leader, the capacity to be able to do that, like look at what's going well and what feeds you and what nourishes you, because there's plenty that's going to take energy away from you. Yeah. And I'd be curious to know, what each of you do in that circumstance, or how that expresses itself in your teams and maybe even at home. Like what does that look like?
I have some thoughts around that, Jeremy. I think about, I had a friend, and she's a therapist, but she's also a friend. And she used to talk to me about understanding energy drainers and energy gainers and what those are for you. And I know it sounds, a little bit like cheesy, but I think about it all the time, because when I think about how I can restore myself at the end of the day, I kind of have in my mind, what are those energy gainers? And that doesn't necessarily mean energy like running a marathon energy. It means, what kind of energy do I want to cultivate right now? Do I want it to be restful energy? Do I want it to be metabolic energy where I am running and jumping? Is it loving energy? And if that's the case, if that's how I want to feel each day, what's one thing that I can do to cultivate that energy? Maybe it is restful energy, and my one thing is to take a nap. Maybe I don't have time for a nap, so my one thing is to do a breathing exercise. But in thinking about my energy gainers, I have to also consider, okay, well, what drains that energy? If I come home and I've had a horrible day and I finish half a bottle of wine, is that an energy drainer or is that a gainer? And depending on what I want to cultivate, if I want to cultivate rest, then that's going to be a drainer, right? Because it's not going to do it for me. If I'm binge watching Netflix episode after episode after episode well into the night, again, that's a drainer. I'm not saying that there's not a time and a place for those things. I'm just saying, like, consider it in the sense of how you want to restore yourself at the end of the day.
Yeah, at a real practical, personal level, I have to say, when the pandemic started, I just suddenly felt like man, this is going to require some more energy, and this is going to be require more focus and time. And it's kind of interesting in hindsight that I made a couple of decisions that weren't meant to be some momentous thing, but I stopped drinking any alcohol, not on weekends. I'm still well at it at weekends. Don't worry. And I don't. That's not from, I hesitate to say that to other folks in my firm because I don't want to sound like that's my prescription. But I'll say for me, I realized, just as you described, Chela, that can be an energy drainer. And I was going to need that energy. And frankly, at a practical level, like at first we had emergency task force meetings at 6:30 every morning because that was the only time everybody had available. So it was just very practical. And I frankly kind of stopped watching television too. Not that I watch a ton. I think it's because mostly I watch sports. And yet I needed some release points too, and started, trying to make a point of most of my reading tends to be more, nonfiction. I said, I'm going to carve out, at least 15 minutes every night before I go to bed where I'm just indulging in some fun fiction thing that's a bit of an escape. So I have realized that my self-care comes in like 15-minute increment. And that's okay, that can work for me. But I also want to give one other pitch, and it may sound silly in a way, so simple, but I'd like to give a pitch for vacations. At the beginning of this pandemic, in one of our community meetings, the town hall meeting, I told everybody I was worried. I could see what was coming. There's a seasonality. We do a lot of tax work. And there are times when you could take vacation. There's times really you can't because of the client demands. And so we're entering a time that's when people take vacations, but yet they couldn't travel. And I knew a whole bunch of people, we're going to put it off. And I was really pressing them to say, take a vacation. I know it's not the vacation you wanted, but take a vacation. And it was met with a lot of cynicism, like, they're just trying to get the liability down on the books, or they're trying. I'm like, I don't. All right. But I took a week vacation just a couple of weeks ago, and I realized my first day back was a board meeting. And normally a 7-hour board meeting is a pretty draining thing. By the end of that day, I'm shot. And I was shocked that my energy was really good at the end of that day. And so I think every other week I'll take a vacation. I think it really cleared out some accumulated stress that you're not so aware of day to day until you clean it up.
In your day-to-day environment, right? So, yeah. It's great. Eugene, hello.
Jeremy, Chela, Brian, thank you guys. Hey, I want to, I'm going to take owner's prerogative and ask the first couple questions. Jeremy, you talked about support structures that you've seen CEOs set up for themselves outside of their friends and family and employees. Give me some examples of those, would you?
Sure. Somebody I know has a group of his buddies get together every Sunday night, and 5 guys, and nothing is off the table. That they have cultivated such a high quality relationship, a high trusting relationship. They can talk about anything, and they hold each other accountable. They give each other support. That's one thing. Coach, masseuse, masseur, whatever.
Off limits these days, Jeremy.
Yeah, it's true. What else? Trainer, that can take multiple forms. Therapist, I think that those things shouldn't be considered extra. I think they should be considered like de facto. This is part of how we get it done.
I will share on my own, which is my husband and I are, by ourselves, and we don't have children, and we have pretty quiet spaces. And so we've always been each other's confidant and coach. But just before the pandemic started, I brought in an executive coach, and that has been spectacular. Can't give high enough marks for that. Brian, you talk a lot about your increased role as the Chief Communications Officer. Tell us what are the most important things that you're communicating today that didn't take deliberate effort yesterday?
Well, mostly what's interesting is it's actually not been communication driven by my agenda. It's finding out what questions are on people's minds.
Right.
And trying to actually then is the start. Then you have to figure out what's the real question behind that superficial question they asked.
Mhm.
And that's what's interesting of this weekly cadence is now I kind of start to get some follow-up, or I can say something and they can respond to that. I think thematically, though, I think about that as an opportunity to kind of chase out fear, because those questions are around uncertainties and fears. And I don't know, I don't know how to articulate this. I'm not going to write a book about it one day, I don't think. I don't have it in me. But I have this notion that if you could essentially, it's not remove fear, because fear is there, it's how you respond, but there's something about fear in an organization has this pervasive negative effect, and reorienting, I guess, to your point, Jeremy, what do you have, what's the positive to focus on? Because the focus goes to the fear, and if you can alleviate that, has huge organizational impact, I think.
Well, and you talked about in the green room, you talked about how you have an individual who would spend all day long traveling between personnel, and who not only could pick up messages, but disseminate messages. And we don't have that today. Or have you, are you replacing that?
Oh, yeah. So I'll tell you the story. This is a guy, and I think it's unique. We made this position because it suited him. And we call him our head of employee relations. And he has numerous jobs, but one of them is really just to be a support to many leaders in the firm around personnel matters. And partly he just independently reaches out to people all around the firm. So he doesn't have to be directed. Please check in with Jeremy, although he will take that direction. But and he, amongst everyone in the firm, felt wed to the office. How does he do his job? He walks around the office. He goes to different offices each day, and he pops in and says hi and kind of reads and how's it going and see where the conversation goes. And he admitted that he thought, what in the world am I going to do now that we can't go to the office? And in the beginning of this pandemic, he was calling 30 people a day in the firm just to check in. Just that was his cadence around the office. And so he replicated it remotely, and he was shocked at how easy that was to do, actually. And I'm so delighted we have somebody who can do that, because the rest of us don't have time to make 30 phone calls a day.
Yeah, and this is a fellow who's totally trusted. He somehow has had the superpower of working in a firm of 500 people and not cultivating a single enemy. He's totally trusted. He's totally beloved. He's admired and respected by everybody. He's a really unique human being, and I think a huge strategic asset for the firm, because you can pick up data points of what's going on in the field a lot quicker, right? When that's somebody's job, and I think that's something that a really healthy culture allows to have happen.
I think that trust comes partly because he's not an agent of our agenda, leadership's agenda. We are listening to him. That's his role.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. We do have a comment and a question from my good friend, Susie Sosa. And Susie had noted that the problem is that emotions are impacting team members' ability to do their job. And she's noticing sadness and people being tired, and the lack of focus resultingly. And she is, this is me plugging in, just knowing Susie, the overachiever that she is, she's trying to solve everybody's problems. And she's not able to solve these emotional problems for people. Jeremy, what are we supposed to do? We see this going on with our team members. And as CEOs of organizations, what's our responsibility? What's realistic our capacity?
Well, it's what we've done. I mean, to talk about some of the work I've done for Brian's firms, like we've done ongoing development work so that people have the skill to know what to do with it. And, obviously the team's emotions aren't one person's responsibility. Our emotions are our own responsibilities. But what the leader could do is create the atmosphere where these skills are learnable. And, I think about them even before this, that these are kind of licensed to do business in the 21st century. And now we know why, right? So, as I said, there's skills we don't learn in business school, and yet they affect everything we do. So
from our last talk, I think there were 4 points you made.
Understand, understand where you're putting your attention, right?
Okay.
And then understand how you're relating to emotion, right? So the two basic ways people relate to emotion is either to stuff them and suppress them or spill them out into the environment. And neither of which are particularly helpful. The skill we work to cultivate is like learning how to allow and accept it. Right now, here's what I'm experiencing.
Right.
And we know there's a dozen different studies that show when you have that relationship to your emotion, right, the emotion comes up and then it goes away, and that you have greater clarity, of greater flexibility. It's just as important to know how to do that as it is to read a balance sheet or a cash flow statement.
Thank you.
And then the third one, is to direct attention to what can we do? It's the Apollo 13 moment. It's like, okay, what is working? What is working in this blown up spacecraft? And then that gives you the solid ground to walk on.
Chela, as the brown queer man in the room, usually, I know that sometimes it gets exhausting being, the black woman in the room, but I do think our, black and brown brothers and sisters have a special exhaustion right now, and that is trying to explain for lots of people. And I know a lot of my friends that are just saying, I'm not explaining to you anymore. I'm gonna beg for your generosity to share that perspective here now, so that people understand why sometimes we're discontinuing.
Sure. It looks like you went off screen there, but I'm going to go ahead.
He was abducted.
I'm back. It's a power issue.
Okay. It's interesting because I recently had this conversation with my husband about no longer talking to people about race. And so I do appreciate that you mentioned the graciousness that it takes. And I think it's because more often than not, my belief is that lots of people do understand what's going on, or at least they can try to empathize and put themselves in the shoes of maybe a brown person or a brown queer man or a black woman. I think that many people can attempt to practice some empathy and try to understand how difficult it is to carry on throughout your day when you are inundated with images of, Black people being killed by police officers or being shot, and the secondary trauma that is associated with that. But really, that's what's going on. It's traumatic. I made the choice a long time ago to not engage with those images and videos on social media. I made the choice not to watch them. I don't purposely seek out that sort of thing. Right. I do know that we have a responsibility to understand what's going on in the world. But at the same time, I think that for Black people, Black women, Black, brown people, I think that it's important for us to really try to put some sort of boundary there. Oh my goodness, Brian has children.
I told you he pops up. I love this.
I think it's important though for us to put some kind of boundary. I would make it through, but hello, everyone. Put some kind of boundary there and really recognize what we're taking in, and that is the best thing that I can suggest. Recognize what we're taking in, try to filter it as much as possible, and if you are not a Black or brown person, then flip the script. Actually engage, like look at it, like make yourself uncomfortable, because that's going to help you to have some empathy and really understand what we're experiencing on top of COVID-19, economic downturn, and regular work every day.
I've got one more question, but I'm going to remind people that there is a link to the evaluation in the Hopin chat. So please do be sure to fill out the evaluation. I'm also going to ask Jeremy if there's a closing point or a summation point that you have in mind right now that you'd like to facilitate in conversation.
I think the theme that we heard through all this is all about quality of relationship, right? And quality of relationship with one another and quality of relationship with yourself. And that's a non-negotiable, right? So,
Chela, do you have?
Yes, I do. So my thing is in line with what Jeremy said. I really want to encourage people to connect with other people, particularly with people who have similar experiences to you. So like Brian, connecting with other industry leaders or other CEOs getting together, like Culturati offers. Find ways to connect with people who are experiencing things like you so that you don't have to explain yourself in the room, which is why I host the Sister Circle group coaching for Black women. We don't have to explain any of that, right? It's already understood and we can just jump into the real deal stuff.
Thank you. Brian?
Ben graciously got a certain time. I just want to add, because I think a lot of leaders probably relate to this. I feel I take pride in being pretty resilient and bouncing back and handling a lot of stress. And there have been a few moments in these past few months where I was surprised to realize how much stress I was accumulating, and moments that I thought, oh, I don't tend to have to think about that a lot for myself, and I feel blessed about that, but I better pay some attention. So I'd recommend everybody sort of make sure you're checking in with yourself, and you may need some things that aren't part of your normal routine.
yeah.
Thank you. I will note how much we've heard about, relationships where you can be vulnerable, connections, reading fiction, getting out of your routine. We are working, playing, sleeping, many of us in the same places day and night. And we've got to do something. Our minds have to switch to a different mode at some point in the day or at some point at night. And we've got to figure out how to make that happen. And I'll end with noting, I think the second most popular word, even on the second word cloud, was hopeful.
Yeah.
And, the resiliency that people continue to hold on to, whether we're able to muster it immediately right now. We know that we're resilient, and we know that we're hopeful, and we know that we'll get through this pandemic. There'll be a new normal, but there's some silver lining in the clouds too. I bet all of us have spent some pretty unique time with our families or friends in unique ways.
Yeah.
So I want to thank you guys for joining us today. I want to thank our audience. Please fill out the survey, and Sophia and Maria, who run all the back end, will be reaching out and letting you guys know about our Culturati Live in September, which will be all about the Greenway Waterloo project. Jeremy, Chela, and Brian, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Eugene.
Thank you.